In the spring of 2013, a couple went to check out a home that had been listed for sale in Yakima County, Washington. They were met there by a local real estate agent who had arranged to show them around the property. After just a short walkthrough, the man, the woman, and the agent all agreed that the place was perfect. It had absolutely everything that they were looking for. Unfortunately, this was no ordinary home tour. You see, this couple never had any intention of purchasing this property. In fact, they weren't planning on moving at all. The true reason for their visit that day would only become clear several weeks later. That was when police were called to this same house about a truly awful discovery that had been made inside. May 25th, 2013, started off like any other Saturday for 78-year-old Vern Holbrook. After getting up and finishing his morning routine, he headed to the offices of his company, Aspen Real Estate LLC, located in the city of Yakima, Washington. Despite being in what many people would consider to be their twilight years, Vern was an incredibly busy man. At 78 years old, he was still doing more in a day than most people half his age. In addition to running his successful real estate business, he had a ton of hobbies, was active in his church and professional organizations, and most of all, enjoyed spending time with his large and loving family. Vern was the definition of what you'd call a self-made man. A child of the 1930s, he had been born and raised in Idaho, and his first career had been driving oil trucks. However, in 1965, he decided to take a risk and chase his dreams. He and his young family picked up and moved to Washington. It was here that he would begin his lifelong passion of becoming a successful real estate agent and would go on to start his own business. Over the next few decades, Vern worked countless hours to not only build Aspen Real Estate from the ground up, but to continue to develop his own skills and credentials. He became a broker, a member of the Washington and National Association of Realtors, and earned a number of distinctions within the field. His tireless efforts definitely paid off. Within Yakima and the surrounding area, Vern became one of the most well-known names in the industry and developed a reputation for being someone who clients could trust and depend on, someone who really took care of other people. This integrity was by no means limited to business. According to those who knew Vern, it was how he had always lived his life. When he met and married his second wife, Nola Fox, he immediately took her two sons, Andrew and Chad Rockenfield, under his wing. The boys had been raised by their mother alone, and though they were adults by the time that Vern came into their lives, he did everything he could to be a parent to them. This became all the more meaningful to them in 2007, when Nola passed away after a lengthy battle with cancer. Vern continued to maintain close relationships with them, and they both considered him to be their father. Family, in general, was something Vern always placed at the center of his life. Whether it was by helping someone out with a job, or his yearly free-for-all trip to Toys R Us that he would take with his 12 grandchildren, he was happiest when he was spending time around the people that he loved. Of course, time was something that was always in short supply for Vern. As you might imagine, running his business was pretty hectic in and of itself, but he also had a bunch of other hobbies and interests. Vern loved sports, especially basketball and baseball, was a deacon at his local church, maintained a respectable garden, and also enjoyed fishing and golfing. Now, Vern had made previous attempts to have a more normal schedule for a man of his age, but somehow that just never seemed to be in the cards. He had even tried to sell his business at one point and retire, but the deal had eventually fallen through. As a result, at 78 years old, he showed no signs of slowing down. After arriving at the office on this particular Saturday, Vern went in and did his usual rounds with his employees. He made some small talk, had a look at his calendar, and double-checked the clients he was supposed to be meeting with. It was actually looking like it was going to be a pretty light day, all things considered. He had a few homes to show, but planned to come back to the office and wrap up early that afternoon. This was perfect because later on he was supposed to go fishing with a few friends. With that, Vern hopped into his pickup truck and headed out. For most of the rest of the day, business would go on as usual at Aspen Real Estate. But Vern never returned to the office. As employees started to notice this, they became increasingly concerned, especially when they couldn't reach him on his cell phone, which he always kept with him. They had no way of knowing this, but at that very moment, Vern was in serious danger, and with each passing second, the situation was growing more and more dire. Shortly after 7:30 p.m. that same evening, the Yakima County Sheriff's Department received a distressing 911 call. That call was made by a man named Javier Cardenas, who stated that someone was seriously injured inside of a vacant house just a few miles northwest of the city. The property was located on Summit View Road in the small community of Cowiche. The place was in a mostly rural area, and there weren't really many other houses in the immediate vicinity. When officers arrived at the scene, they could hear Javier shouting inside. They followed his voice to a back master bedroom, where they found an elderly man lying on the floor. The man was on his side, and there was a large pool of blood surrounding him on the carpet. He had suffered injuries to his head and neck, and was only barely conscious. It was obvious that he had been the victim of some kind of attack. As they waited for additional help, the officers asked Javier some basic questions. He said that he didn't know much about what was going on, but that he did know the name of the victim. The man was his employer, Vern Holbrook. He said that both of them were real estate agents, and that this property had been listed for sale with their company, Aspen Real Estate. Paramedics arrived and got a closer look at Vern's injuries, but it quickly became clear that the situation wasn't good. He had multiple knife wounds, including a slash to his throat, and showed signs of having sustained serious and repeated blunt force injuries to his head. Still, he was alive and was rushed to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for immediate care. At the same time, detectives were sent out to the property to begin an investigation. The first person they spoke with was Javier. They wanted to know what he was doing at the house and how he had come to discover the attack on Vern. Javier explained that Vern had been scheduled to show a couple of homes to prospective buyers that day, one of which was the Summit View Road property. It wasn't supposed to be a long appointment, though, and Vern had been expected to come back to their offices around noon. He said that he and others became concerned when Vern never came back, and none of them were able to reach him on his cell phone either. Javier stated that the reason he knew where to find Vern was because he was the one who actually opened the home to get it ready for the walkthrough that day. He claimed that he didn't know the names of the buyers that Vern was meeting with, though, and that he had left before they got there. A thorough search of the scene appeared to back up Javier's story, but unfortunately didn't provide many concrete clues. In fact, it was kind of easier to say what didn't happen rather than what did. Because Vern's Chevy pickup truck was still parked in the driveway of the home, and his wallet and keys were untouched, detectives were confident that this wasn't a robbery. They briefly entertained the idea that maybe someone had been squatting in the residence and had attacked Vern when they were discovered, but this was also quickly dismissed. The house was almost completely empty, and there were no signs that anyone had been living there recently. All that being said, there was one thing, or rather, the absence of a thing, that caught the attention of authorities. This was extremely important because they knew it was their best chance of answering the most crucial question in the case so far. Who had Vern Holbrook been meeting with when he was viciously attacked? While some members of the investigative team continued their work at the crime scene, others went to interview Vern's family. After hearing the news of what had happened, many of them had rushed to gather by his bedside in the hospital. As you might imagine, the family was absolutely devastated. By now, it had been confirmed that Vern suffered traumatic injuries to his brain as a result of the attack, and he had slipped into a coma. It was unclear if he would ever wake up again. Police questioned the family members, but pretty much all of them were in disbelief. They couldn't think of anyone who would do something like this, especially to Vern, who was known for being so loving and generous with everyone in his life. With little to go on, and their only witness unresponsive, Authorities knew that they would need to try a different approach if they were going to start making any progress in the investigation. Luckily, they were about to get their first major lead. Back at the crime scene, detectives had noticed that Vern's cell phone was missing. As previously mentioned, he took his phone with him everywhere, so this didn't seem like a coincidence. They believed that whoever had attacked him had likely stolen the device to prevent police from getting their hands on it. Even after multiple searches of the property, the cell phone wasn't able to be located. Fortunately, police didn't need the actual phone itself in order to obtain Vern's call records. Those records were reviewed, and one number quickly stood out. Not only had it contacted Vern multiple times, it was also the last number in the logs prior to the attack. In other words, this was almost certainly the person that Vern had been scheduled to meet with. Police obtained a separate warrant to look into this phone number, revealing that it belonged to a woman named Adriana Mendez. Investigators looked into Adriana's background and discovered that she was 24 years old and was the mother of 3 young children. For the last little while, she and her kids had been living at the Sunshine Motel, a place that was well known to law enforcement. The Sunshine Motel was notorious for being a hotbed of drugs, sex work, and just general criminal activity. According to news articles from around that time, police were there pretty much every day, as there was always some sort of assault, robbery, or burglary to investigate. All the same, this was kind of a strange development. As far as authorities were aware, Vern had no connection to the Sunshine Motel or anyone that lived there, including Adriana Mendez. When they brought up her name to family members, they said that they had never heard of her before. Still, police knew they had to speak to her. They showed up at Adriana's room, and she agreed to come down for an interview.
We're detectives with the Yakima County Sheriff's Office. What is your full name?
Adriana Mendez.
Okay, and what is your address?
Sunshine Motel.
Sunshine Motel.
Yes, currently.
Adriana explained that she and her kids had been living at the Sunshine Motel because they had recently been evicted from their last place. She said she was still trying to get back on her feet, and that this was actually the reason that she had contacted Vern Holbrook. She stated that she didn't actually know Vern, but that she had called him because she had this trailer she was looking to sell. She needed money, so she was hoping to find out the fastest way she could get it off her hands for some quick cash. However, Adriana said that Vern had kind of blown her off. She called him a couple of times and spoke with him, but both times he was showing houses and told her he was too busy.
Your phone number came up on Vern's phone records.
I called him on Friday to ask him what was the fastest way to sell a trailer, if he can help me out.
How did you get Vern's number to call him on Friday?
I went under Aspen. The first time he told me that he was busy, that he was showing a house, to call him back. I called him back and he told me he was still busy. And that's it. That's as far as it went.
Detectives asked Adriana some more detailed questions concerning her whereabouts at the time of the attack. In particular, they wanted to know if she had set up a viewing for a house that Saturday, and whether she had ever been to the Cowiche area where the crime scene was located.
Have you ever been out to Cowiche? When's the last time you were there?
Oh, years back.
Did you drive out there on Saturday?
No.
Did you call Vern to set up a viewing for a house?
No. The only time that I called Vern was on Friday to ask him about selling the trailer.
Unfortunately for Adriana, there was a reason the detectives were asking these specific questions. You see, they had quite a bit more information than they were letting on. And now, they knew for sure that she was lying to them. I told you before about Vern's call records and the search warrant for Adriana's phone number. But prior to sitting down for the interview, police had actually obtained 2 other crucial pieces of evidence. The first was location data from Adriana's phone, which placed her in the Cowiche area close to the crime scene right at the time that last call to Vern was made. The second was surveillance footage obtained from the Sunshine Motel, which showed her 3 kids, and an unknown man getting into a vehicle in the parking lot and driving off that morning shortly before Vern was scheduled to meet with the prospective buyers at the Summit View Road address.
What if I told you that I knew for a fact that you had driven out there?
Most of my calls are made from my house, from the motel.
Most of them are.
Mhm.
I agree. You're right about that. But not all of them. Your call is the last call that Vern received. And at the time, your phone was within a few miles of the house that he was at. The evidence doesn't lie.
I don't know what to tell you because I didn't go nowhere. You can ask anybody there at the motel.
If you're going to lie to me about things that I already know the answers to, then I feel like I can't trust you.
You know what occurred out there. What's his name? Be honest.
As you just saw, even after being confronted with the evidence, Adriana initially tried to keep up the lie. But as detectives continued to hammer her on the contradictions in her story, she eventually agreed to reveal who she had been with in the motel surveillance footage. She said the man's name was Luis Gomez Monges. Luis was 39 years old, and he was Adriana's boyfriend. He had a lengthy criminal history, mostly for drug-related offenses, and had actually just recently been arrested on a possession charge.
What's his name?
Luis
Luis what?
Gomez Moniz.
Is Luis your boyfriend's?
Yeah. Luis is all my kids know as a dad.
Are you telling me the truth about that?
Yes. He's been locked up, actually, as a matter of fact.
He's been locked up.
Yes, for possession.
Where do you think Luis is right now?
At all.
Even though Adriana didn't know where Luis was, this proved to be more than enough information. After his name was passed on to the county's Violent Crimes Unit, officers were quickly able to track him down. He was at a casino in the city of Toppenish, about 20 miles south of Yakima. As Luis was being arrested, a search of his vehicle was performed. A box cutter was found inside, one that police believed could have been used to attack Vern Holbrook. The item was sent away for analysis, and Luis was also brought in for questioning. Here's a taste of how that went.
Why did you hurt the old man?
¿Y por qué hacerle mal al viejito?
Yo no golpeé a ni un viejito.
I didn't beat up any old man.
What happened to him?
Yo no lo conozco.
I don't know him.
I believe you don't know him, but you met him on Saturday.
Pero el sábado sí lo conoció.
That's bullshit. Adriana has already told us the truth about what happened that day.
So yeah, Luis was not very cooperative, and the interview didn't last for very long. However, what detectives said there at the end was not a bluff. Adriana had given them some more information. She now admitted that her and Luis were the people that Vern was scheduled to meet with on May 25th. They had arranged to see the Summit View Road property late that morning and were pretending like they were interested in buying the place. After driving up there, Adriana said that her and Luis left her kids in the car and followed Vern inside. The next thing she knew, Luis had attacked Vern from behind.
So what happened?
I didn't go in the house. We both did.
How many swings did you see?
One. I went back to the car. He went back to the car with me. He wasn't in there that long.
At this point, it looked like things were starting to come together. Detectives had 2 people in custody who they believed were responsible for the attack on Vern, and they had evidence showing that they had lured him to the crime scene. Of course, there was a problem, and it's likely one you've noticed as well. None of this still really made any sense. As I previously mentioned, there was no sign of a robbery, unless you count Vern's missing phone, but I mean, that would have been an awfully elaborate plan just to steal a cell phone. Then there was the fact that there was no prior connection between Vern and either of the suspects. So, what was this all about? Well, as it happened, Adriana had let one other thing slip during her lengthy interview, something that would turn out to be the key to the whole case.
Did anyone put you up to scheduling an appointment with Vern to view a house?
No.
Not at all.
No, not at all.
You're
I didn't-
100% certain.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What made you look at Aspen?
Because I know a couple of people that used to work there.
Who's that?
Daniel.
Vern's family might not have known who Adriana Mendez was, but Daniel was a name that they definitely recognized. And with what investigators found out next, the pieces would finally start to fall into place. After arresting Adriana and Luis, detectives went back to speak with Vern's family. When they brought up the name Daniel, a bunch of them immediately thought they knew who Adriana had been talking about. A 28-year-old employee of Aspen Real Estate named Daniel Blizzard. According to the family members, Daniel had started working for Vern a few years earlier. He was young, hardworking, and incredibly motivated, qualities that quickly caught Vern's attention. Vern could tell that Daniel was very ambitious. To some extent, he reminded him of himself at that age. Because of that, he really tried to help Daniel with his career and guide him, and they developed this sort of mentor-mentee relationship. Sometime in 2007, Vern decided that he was ready to slow down a bit. By this point, he had put several decades into his business, and he'd kind of done everything he wanted to do. His company was very successful, and he had made it. As a result, he was considering selling Aspen Real Estate and retiring. Now, Vern had plenty of offers from some of these big national real estate chains. But being the guy he wasn't interested in selling to just anyone. He built his whole business on relationships, and it was important to him that Aspen keep its local identity. Vern went to his children and stepchildren and asked if they'd consider taking over, but they all had their own careers. So he was really happy when Daniel stepped up and made him an offer. Specifically, Daniel and his brothers approached him with a number that they all agreed on, and they made a handshake deal. The deal was that Vern would stay on for a bit to help with the transition, but that Daniel would take over the day-to-day and would eventually own the company outright. This would happen as long as Daniel and his brothers continued to make payments every month until they had reached the price for the company that they had negotiated. This whole situation was what I referred to briefly before when I was talking about how Vern had previously tried to retire. If you'll recall, though, I also said that it didn't work out. And if you've been paying attention to the dates here, you can probably guess why. Now, I'm pretty sure most of us remember what happened between 2007 and 2008, but just in case you were living under a rock, the entire global economy crashed. Because the housing market was at the center of that crash, the real estate industry was hit especially hard. The timing couldn't have been worse in terms of the deal between Vern and Daniel. Daniel and his brothers had only made a couple of payments at the time the crash happened. Vern realized that this was beyond Daniel's control, and he was very understanding. He said, don't worry, we're going to get this figured out. If we have to rework the payments for a while to weather the storm, that's okay. For the next 16 months, Vern was incredibly patient, and he didn't take a dime from the business. However, around this time, he started to get a little uneasy. It was beginning to feel like Daniel was under the impression that he was just never going to have to pay for the business. Vern eventually confronted Daniel about this, and he was shocked by how Daniel responded. It turned out that, Daniel just thought he was getting Vern's business for free, basically. Obviously, Vern wasn't going to let that happen, so he made the difficult and very uncomfortable choice to take his business back. Vern's family said that somehow Daniel was the one who came out of all of this feeling betrayed. It really hurt the relationship between them, but all the same, Vern tried not to hold a grudge. Instead, he tried to move on with his life. Understandably, all of this was very interesting to detectives, but it was about to go a step further. You see, it turned out that there was another part to that business agreement between Vern and Daniel Blizzard. One that now looked incredibly suspicious. When Daniel and his brothers were negotiating the details to buy Aspen Real Estate, they had requested to take out what's known as a key man life insurance policy on Vern. Essentially, this was an acknowledgement that as the face of the company, Vern was an integral part of the business. The life insurance policy would therefore compensate Daniel and his brothers if anything happened to Vern, and would pay out a maximum of $1.58 million. When Vern told his family about the life insurance policy, at the time they were unsettled by it, but he assured them it was a pretty standard part of agreements like this. He trusted Daniel, so he went ahead and signed it. Detectives dug into this a little bit more, and they discovered something that was truly disturbing. Though Daniel had missed numerous payments during those 16 months when he was supposed to be buying Aspen real estate, there was one bill he had never neglected: the premiums for the Key Man life insurance policy. That was the case even after Vern took the business back from Daniel. To investigators, this had all the makings of a motive. The only question now was, could they prove Daniel Blizzard was the real mastermind of the attack on Vern? Police knew of at least one place they could turn, but what they weren't anticipating was that there would be one final awful twist in the case. After learning about Daniel Blizzard and all of the troubling details surrounding his failed bid to buy Aspen real estate, detectives felt that they were now on the right track. Of course, they were still missing some crucial information they needed to tie everything together. So they went back to the one person they knew could probably give them the answers they were looking for: Adriana Mendez. Because of how their initial conversation with Adriana had gone, investigators didn't just interview her right away, though. They were pretty sure she was going to try and lie to them again, so beforehand they gathered some additional evidence. The first thing they did was comb through more of that surveillance footage they had collected from the Sunshine Motel. The video revealed that Daniel had visited Adriana several times in the weeks leading up to the attack on Vern. Not only that, but he was clearly paying for the room that her and her kids were staying in. The second thing authorities did was obtain more of Adriana's cell phone records, specifically her text messages. The messages revealed that she and Daniel had been talking extensively in the lead up to the crime. One exchange in particular stood out. It happened on the morning of the attack. In it, Daniel texted, quote, "Don't be late for shopping." Adriana replied that she was in the middle of getting ready. She then went on to say, quote, "I was thinking of taking a pic." To detectives, this sounded like a coded conversation about the crime. Daniel was checking in to make sure things were going according to plan. Sure enough, when investigators did finally sit down with Adriana for a second time, she pretty much admitted to all of this. She said that Daniel was the one who had roped her and Luis into the whole situation. She also revealed something else that authorities were completely unprepared for. She had met Daniel through a woman named Jill Taylor, and Jill had a connection to Vern that was much closer to home.
We're getting a pretty good, clear picture of what happened here, but we need you to just be completely honest.
Okay.
How's Daniel know Luis?
Through me.
Are you and Daniel involved in a sexual relationship?
No, we're not.
Are you friends?
Yes, we're friends. I met Daniel through Jill Taylor. I believe Vern is grandfather of Jill's kids.
As you just heard there, Jill was the mother of 3 of Vern's grandchildren. She had been married to one of his stepsons, Chad Rockenfield, though the marriage had since ended in divorce. When Vern's family members were asked about Jill, they explained that she was also an employee of Aspen Real Estate. Following her divorce with Chad, she had been in rough shape, and Vern had given her a job to help her out. He had also helped her with a number of bills, such as her rent and car payments. Some members of the family had been against this, particularly Chad and his brother Andrew. They warned Vern that Jill was using hard drugs and had other issues. Being the family man that he was, though, Vern felt that he needed to be there for Jill. After all, he argued, she was the mother of his grandkids. Despite her problems, the family members said that they didn't want to believe that Jill could have had anything to do with the attack on Vern. That was until a bombshell revelation emerged. You see, Jill Taylor had been involved in a secret relationship with Daniel Blizzard, one that had been going on for a while now. When detectives began asking some of the employees at Aspen Real Estate more about this, they learned that about a month before the attack, Vern and Jill had gotten into a huge argument. He had found out about this relationship and was incredibly hurt. He told Jill that he was cutting her off and would no longer be helping her financially. To investigators, this again looked like motive. They wondered, maybe Jill had done more than just introduce Daniel to Adriana. Maybe she had helped him to plan the entire crime. This would have made sense, because after their falling out, Daniel and Vern didn't really interact much anymore. Jill, though, was still close to Vern and would have known the ins and outs of his daily schedule. Detectives brought Jill in for an interview, but she wasn't very cooperative. She admitted that Adriana had been staying with her for a bit a few months ago, but as soon as she was asked a single question about Daniel, she immediately shut the conversation down.
I understand that you're the one that introduced Daniel to Adriana Mendez.
I ran into Adriana in December. I was at a friend's house and she was having a trouble with her household, so I let her live with me for a while. And that's how he met her, because he would come to my apartment and, just check on things.
What do you think of Vern? Are you close to him?
Yeah, I've always been close to Vern.
When Daniel would talk about Vern, what would he say?
I'm done talking.
Fortunately, by this point, police had already finished that other conversation with Adriana, and she had given them a lot more insight into the crime, particularly the planning and motivations behind it. Adriana explained that Daniel and Jill had manipulated her and Luis from the start. They knew that she was experiencing difficulties, that Luis was facing deportation over his drug charges, and that they were in desperate need of money. At first, when Jill introduced her to Daniel, Adriana said that he seemed like a great guy. He came off like a friend who was really trying to help them get through a tough situation. In addition to paying for their motel room, he bought them groceries, worked on Luis's legal situation, and would even show up with toys for Adriana's kids. However, after a little while, he revealed his true intentions. Daniel asked Adriana if her and Luis would be willing to return the favor. He told them he was having a problem with this guy, Vern Holbrook. He offered them $12,000 if they could get Vern out of the way. Of course, Adriana and Luis needed the money, but more than that, they felt like they owed Daniel for everything he had done for them. As a result, Adriana said that they had agreed to take part in his plan. For the next little while, they had arranged the details, setting up exactly how they would lure Vern to one of his own properties and ambush him while posing as buyers. Disturbingly, Daniel had accompanied Adriana and Luis to different homes to choose the location for the attack. This was the context behind that tour I described at the beginning of the video. Daniel Blizzard was the real estate agent who had arranged the tour, and he, Adriana, and Luis were picking out locations to commit their brutal crime. After hearing all of this, detectives finally decided to bring Daniel Blizzard in and confront him with what they knew. Much like the conversation with Luis, though, the interview ultimately wasn't very productive. Daniel played dumb and tried to claim that his involvement with Adriana was purely a coincidence. At the same time, he suggested that authorities were trying to turn the whole situation around on him.
Do you know her?
Yeah, Adriana Mendez. I met her through Jill.
Do you know where Adriana is right now?
Well, I heard that she was in jail.
Do you know why she's in jail?
She had something to do with Vern attack, supposedly.
Do you think that's kind of a strange coincidence that this is a girl that you're friends with?
That's 1 in a million.
1 in a million, that the guy who has a $1.58 million life insurance policy on Vern just happens to be at the motel room of the 2 people who attacked Vern?
I was only being a good friend to her because she had little kids.
Your story's thin, Daniel.
It looks like you're trying to spin something on me.
Regardless of Daniel's lack of cooperation, detectives now felt they understood everything that had gone on. They believed that Daniel was angry and bitter about the Aspen real estate deal, and that he had plotted with Jill, Adriana, and Luis to have Vern murdered in order to collect on the Keyman life insurance policy. All 4 of them were arrested and charged with attempted first-degree murder. Understandably, Vern's loved ones were gutted when they learned what investigators had uncovered, particularly the allegation that Jill had helped Daniel to plan the whole thing. This was soon backed by further statements from those who knew Jill and Daniel, who said that they had overheard them talking about killing Vern and hiring a hitman. Unfortunately, the devastating events weren't quite over. In late January of 2014, so a little over 8 months after Vern Holbrook was ambushed inside the Summit View Road home, he passed away from his injuries. Though he had managed to survive the initial attack, He was never the same again. Even after waking up from his coma, he had been in and out of hospitals. It would later be determined that the brain damage Vern had suffered as a result of the brutal assault had left him without a crucial reflex that is responsible for helping you to cough and clear out your airways. Because of this, Vern had been stricken with pneumonia over and over again, the complications from which had eventually killed him. Since all of this had been caused by the attack, though, his death was still ruled a homicide, and the charges against Daniel, Jill, Adriana, and Luis were upgraded to murder. Much to the frustration of both detectives and Vern's family, though, it was at this point that the investigation hit a serious snag. You remember that box cutter that police found in Luis's vehicle when he was initially arrested? Well, unfortunately, testing on it came back negative for blood and DNA. That meant that authorities had no murder weapon and really no physical evidence in the case. Because of this, they felt that they had no other choice but to turn some of their suspects into witnesses. They prioritized going after Daniel because he was the mastermind, and Luis because he had actually carried out the killing. However, the murder charges against Adriana and Jill were dropped in exchange for their testimony. When the case went to trial in mid-2014, Adriana gave the same version of events that she told to police during her interviews. Most of the new details came from Jill, who still denied any wrongdoing, but stated that she knew about Daniel's plans. Like Adriana, Jill referred to Daniel as a manipulator and said that he had tried to get all of them to go along with his scheme. She testified that initially he had wanted her to kill Vern by poisoning him, but that she had refused to go through with it. That's when Daniel had decided to find people that were desperate enough to agree to the murder. When it was all over, Daniel and Luis were both found guilty of first-degree murder. Daniel was sentenced to 34.5 years in prison, while Luis was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Adriana was allowed to plead guilty to second-degree assault and first-degree rendering criminal assistance, as she had admitted to directly participating in the crime. Specifically, she had confessed to smashing Vern's cell phone and throwing the pieces out the window of their vehicle on the way home after they had attacked him and left him for dead. Adriana was sentenced to a year in prison, though was given credit for time served. As for Jill Taylor, all charges were dropped against her, and she was never convicted of any crime related to the murder. This came as a huge blow to Vern's family, as they felt that not only had Jill betrayed him, but that the crime wouldn't have been possible without the information and help that she allegedly gave to Daniel. At the time of this recording, Daniel Blizzard and Luis Gomez-Monges remain in prison. According to the latest available information, Daniel is incarcerated at the Clallam Bay Correction Center, while Luis is incarcerated at the Monroe Correctional Complex. There's so much that's heartbreaking about this case, but I think more than anything what gets me is the awful irony at the center of it. Vern Holbrook spent his whole life building a company that he was proud of and prioritized the people that he loved. But ultimately, it was these very things that people took advantage of to destroy him. I don't mean to suggest that Vern did anything wrong here. It's clear from the interviews that we came across with friends and family that he was extremely loved and made a huge positive impact on the lives of those around him. I think that's a legacy worth celebrating, regardless of how his life ended. Given the way that things played out, it's obviously hard to feel like justice was fully done, especially if you believe, as Vern's family appears to, that Adriana and Jill should have faced harsher penalties. The one thing I can say about that is that it appears that Jill was pretty much exiled from that side of the family when all of this was over. This information comes in part from another tragic event, which is that in November of 2022, one of Vern's stepsons, Chad Rockenfield, sadly passed away. A GoFundMe for Chad's 3 children, which was set up by his brother Andrew, states that they hadn't seen Jill in almost a decade at the time. In another interview we came across, Andrew stated that Vern's loss is still being felt every day, even after all these years. I hope that wherever he and the rest of Vern's loved ones are, they are all doing well. Because seriously, this family has dealt with more than enough tragedy already. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.